Alright, give me a second. I think I got this taken care of. It's been a pretty eventful last string of episodes here on FamiThon. We covered a port of one of the first successful puzzle games, one of the first big releases of Tecmo, a pretty big adventure game from Namco, one of the first entries of a really big series in Japan, and the first game in one of the most popular video game franchises of all time. But now it's time to return to the FamiThon series bread and butter. Bad license games. Musashi no Ken, translating to Musashi's Sword, was a kendo-themed manga written by Motoko Murakami and was published in Weekly Shonen Sunday between 1981 and 1985, and got a 72-episode anime released between 1985 and 86. It follows the life of Musashi Natsuki, the son of two acclaimed kendo swordsmen, and because parents love to live vicariously through their kids, is immediately taken to the sport at 3 years old. And we follow his life over the course of several chapters as he grows older, eventually becoming old enough to follow his life in high school. It seemed solid enough watching a few episodes for this video, although I was kind of annoyed that I would have to follow this 3-year-old kid for a majority of the first episodes, including being tough enough to take down a full-grown adult. But maybe there's something in this slice of life story for you that may make it an underrated gem. Chances are if you do know about this series, it's probably from this Famicom game, since it is pretty English friendly and even got an English Wikipedia article if you can believe it. However, I would just recommend sticking to the anime or manga because this game is pretty lousy. In fact, it's another pretty bad stinker as licensed games go. However, not brought to you by Toei and Bandai, but by Taito of all people. Taito's library of NES and Famicom games so far is pretty sad considering Taito's status in the video game industry. After all, they gave us Space Invaders, and not even the Space Invaders Famicom port lives up to its legacy. I mean, the best they got so far, in my opinion, is what? Gyrodyne? And that was just forgettable. Now granted, most of those games were handled by contract developers. Their Musashi no Ken game would be the first game developed for the Famicom by Taito themselves. And while it's not the worst of their games, I give that title to Elevator Action, this might be the runner-up. And it honestly makes you wish Toei and Bandai were behind it, because their track record is better than this. Musashi no Ken Tadaima Shugyo Chu, the tagline translating to now in the middle of training, is an action platformer where you play as Musashi moving to the right and taking down anything in his way. I should remind you, Musashi no Ken is a pretty down-to-earth manga that really doesn't go for anything outrageous, 3-year-old taking down grown adults aside, so of course there's not a lot to build a platformer off of. So Taito went the Ninja Hattori-kun route and just slapped a bunch of strange enemies into the game. Like, what is that, a Korok Seed Goomba? The angry son from Mario? Weird. Alright, before I get into the thrashing you're expecting, I do want to list a few positives I have with the game. One is Musashi's dog Tochi serving as the time limit to the game. As Musashi travels across the level, so too does Toichi at the bottom of the screen. This serves as a unique way to implement a time limit as well as lip service to the source material. And there's the health bar, which is expressed by a number then say 3 hits and you're dead, which is very interesting, kinda like Metroid's health bar, but in a more linear fashion, and you can even refill it with onigiri hidden in the level. Sadly, the health bar might as well be represented as oniguri's, because every enemy seems to do the same amount of damage to you whether it's 2 hits and you're dead, and 3 hits if you snag the onigiri. So, interesting idea, but it could have been better. And that's it. Everything else in this game is a dumpster fire. First things first, you walk up to this thing and press A. Oh dear, it appears you use A to attack and B to jump. What a silly mistake, this definitely won't get confusing later in the game. But maybe the switch is for the best, because chances are you're going to hit this thing first and find out there are hidden items to collect. Mostly swords, and there's 3 in all, but what do? Later in the game you shift to a fighting game of you competing in a kendo match, and every time you swing your sword up, down, or straight, it takes 10 points off your sword amount. Which just seems a bit pointless? Why bother needing an amount of swords just to be able to swing it? It just feels like pointless busy work. And let me tell you, because of how unpolished this game is, actually getting to the kendo matches will be a miracle. Enemies don't really have anything unique to them, they just wander back and forth, and when they die they spawn immediately afterwards. Sometimes they straight up spawn in the air. Oh wait, did I say sometimes? I mean most of the time. And it's honestly more fun to watch an infinite loop of dying enemies than it is to play this game. And despite not having any pattern to throw you off, they still somehow manage to get in your way and mess you up. And then there's the power-ups, consisting of things like a shoe that unfortunately was programmed to have you run way too fast, so the next thing you know, you'll end up in a pit and restarting your next life. To a question mark, which as the name suggests, is a complete mystery. And of course, to finish the level, you collect a single G floating in the air, because why even try making something interesting? Unfortunately, it's surrounded by a bunch of logs with jumping patterns that flood the screen. Pretty much meaning the only way you're getting that G is hoping you have enough health to take a hit and use that invincibility to collect it. What a large pile of Kasuge. Yeah, this whole game just stinks of Taito's programmers and designers getting a handle on the Famicom hardware. I mean, how many levels do you think this game has? 4. 4 levels. Which, you know, is impressive for 1984. But now that we can fit games as big as Ghosts and Goblins into Famicom carts, you better make them the best 4 levels of all time, or else you get one of the worst Famicom games ever. And with not a single continue option, just makes it worse. If it turned out this game was just a test project, then slapping a franchise on it and calling it a day just feels scummy. Like, here you go kids, our beta build for $50. And it should have just stayed as a beta build, as practice for when they eventually make great games like, Takashi's Challenge. Thankfully, if you're rooting for Taito to eventually put out that great Famicom game, don't worry, it'll be here at the end of 86. However, we're not done with this game, because we got to cover the 2-player mode, which is just that kendo part of the game, but requiring a second player, where you and another player take control of a few Musashi no Ken characters as you essentially play a virtual version of kendo, which based on this is more or less Japanese fencing. And despite me not having another player to test this out, this actually isn't that bad. You know what, I'm willing to say it's pretty good for the time, and judging by the box art, this seemed to be the major selling point of the game. I mean, it feels like something that would be a Musashi no Ken game, unlike the only other video game adaptation it got, a freaking typing game for the PS2 in 2002. And you know, before this, was there really a lot of great co-op 2-player games? Balloon Fight, Super Chinese, maybe tennis and soccer? Not a whole lot, and this one definitely shines as one of the better ones. Shame there's no 1-player mode, and to be honest, if this game was just this, I think it would get a pass from me. But being only 2 players combined with the abominable single-player mode grants this game a D-, barely passing the grade. And at the very least, it's not the worst game on the Famicom with no Ken in the title. And if you want to know what that is, check in next time.